Hello, everybody.
Hey.
Hi, hello.
Finally, then that long silence in headphones was rather stressful.
Ale kluci, někdo teďko začíná, jo?
Do you know when should we start?
I was waiting for.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
We will start just now because of the live stream. So you can start now. Okay.
Hey,
Thank
okay.
you.
So, do you want to start, Michal, or?
Well, let's start from the warm greetings and hello to everybody. I'm very pleased that we can host such a lovely bunch of panelists in this session, feminist session during the creative exchange. And warm greetings to Ljubljana, to Mao, because we are in many places in the world, but our hearts are still in Ljubljana because it's in our future architecture platform tradition that usually in February we should be there, but luckily the technology, which is, as we probably speak later on, can be a bit tricky. This time gives us the opportunity to meet and share some ideas on feminism in architecture, or feminism and architecture, or whatever. We have 3 groups of participants and 3 discussion runners. I think we are, yeah. So let me introduce first Bara and Irena from the Viper Gallery.
Irena.
Hello. And my name is Michal and I'm from the Museum of Architecture in Wrocław, and we will, well, try to lead us in this discussion, or just ask you several questions. And we are together with authors of 3 proposals for this year edition of the Future Architecture Platform. So with Frani, with the Edit Collective and FemArch Collective. What is our idea for this discussion? We were supposed to ask you just for the brief introductions to your projects, as far as I remember. So we should point somebody.
So I will just also say hi from Prague, from Viper Gallery. So thank you for submitting all those projects and for joining us this afternoon. I don't know if you spent the last 2 days visiting other sessions, so everyone's probably already a little bit exhausted after all those 2 days in front of the camera. So, but let's start maybe with the short presentations, and then we can also discuss like some connections to our programs and your ideas and so on. So we were thinking that probably it would be better just to do a short presentation, because we saw the videos, so it maybe makes no sense to see it again, and all the videos are uploaded online, so everyone wants to can see them, and people who are joining us in this discussion and want to see the videos, you can go to architecture, future architecture rooms to see them later. So thank you again. So I suppose we are here from the US, Berlin, and Edit Collective is from
London.
London. Yeah, I was thinking so. So we are in 3 different time zones. So let's start with Frani, because maybe you have like very early morning there in the US.
I think you'll see the sunrise behind me. So sure, I'll share my screen. I've got just 3 slides. Yeah, and first of all, I just want to say what an honor it is to be here. I've so appreciated the time to get to sit with all of your ideas, and I'm looking forward to a conversation today. Just sharing the screen, but in the meantime, yeah, just also think it's kind of an advantage to be able to go last, because maybe I can sort of situate the project in context with some of the sort of themes that have come up throughout the conference. The first, yeah, something that I noticed that has been coming up, like both like disability has been coming up quite a bit, but also rehabilitation. And that's sort of an interesting place maybe to sort of start to explain my project, which actually came out of a conversation with my mom about her experience going through rehabilitation. Oops, okay. Okay, her experience going through rehabilitation after her stroke when I was 8 months old, and just talking about sort of the types of basically instruction that she would have liked to receive upon returning to the home, because the rehabilitation paradigm as she experienced it was a lot more focused on the individual body and basically sort of making sure that like a couple benchmarks of independence were passed. And then in the States, due to kind of like insurance reasons, people were just sent home. And she says she remembers coming back and being like, okay, like, where's the manual? Like, how do I be a mom? And so this project sort of takes that as our sort of prompt and uses design sketches and illustrations to basically sort of compile advice for other mothers with acquired disabilities. And it pairs both these types of sketches that you can see here, that's a little blurry, but pairs illustrations with kind of like anecdotes that are sort of told from a kind of shared mother-daughter perspective, and also pairs it with other sorts of kind of creative illustration tools. We have like my mom's recipe for chili, and I think we really try to think about different ways to sort of share that narrative. Here's just a slide of a bunch of quotes that have sort of been quite generative for me as I was thinking about care, and how care related to how care relates to this project, but also how sort of other themes of interdependence and help and teamwork also sort of can come to explain a lot of the ways in which my mom sort of adapted strategies to the home. And maybe, yeah, just to sort of situate it in a final way with what we just heard from Mary Louise Richards, I was really interested in her point about vulnerability as a point of departure. And just speaking from, I'm in Texas right now, and there were recently these massive climate related power outages. And so I've really been thinking about, how the power outage like affects the disability community. My mom has talked about how friends of hers like often have kind of backup generators, or like, you know, in the manual we were talking about how my mom always keeps her phone charged in case of an emergency, and thinking about how climate change and disability sort of are both sort of impacted by this question of care and this question of interdependence in quite specific and urgent ways. And so to sort of answer that call of like vulnerability as a point of departure, I thought that was quite important. Okay, so that's sort of my presentation. I will pass it on.
Okay, thank you very much. So maybe Lara from FWalks next.
Yeah. Hello, thank you. Also an honor to be here, and thanks for the invitation. I don't really have that much of a presentation. I am showing you quickly a couple of pictures of the FWalk how we did it in Berlin, the second time that we performed it. Let me do that. Can I share? Oh yeah, here. Oh, I'm sorry. I updated my system, so I to give allowance to this program. Wait, hold on a second. This is silly. I'm sorry. Okay. There you go. Well, okay. Unfortunately, would have to quit and reopen. Sorry, I didn't check this before, but I just updated the system to the latest. Yeah. Anyways, and I'm just going to introduce it, and I hope that some of you have watched the video on the website in the Future Architecture Room. So the F-Walks is one of our commission works. It originally started because we were asked to do an audio walk, or not an audio walk, like a city tour for a exhibition in a feminist gallery in Berlin. And the exhibition title was What Could a Non-Sexist City Be Like or Look Like? So a future vision for Berlin, kind of. And so we asked ourselves, like, what do we want to do? And we had previously worked with sound and collecting stories and letting people speak for themselves. So we didn't really feel like super interested in just doing like one tour and going to a couple of houses and say, okay, so this is like the one thing, like that's the non-sexist thing. So we were trying to look for like a system that we could apply and like a tool that to understand like how to broaden your perspective, and which we find interesting for like this future vision, like how can we connect to other people's experiences and acknowledge them and build sympathy. And so then Corona came, and this is how we, eventually we did this audio walk then. And so you can do this either in a group, or you can also just do it by yourself, which came in really handy with Corona. You can download it on our podcast platforms like Spotify, iTunes, whatever. It's on part of our F podcast. And then you just use headphones and your own device and walk through the city, and you can choose whatever starting point, and based on your present state of mind, your assumptions, who you are, what group you're kind of assigned to when other people look at you, and what space you're in, these different stories that you listen to during the F4 kind of resonate and create like a unique experience every time. So what we do is we talk to people, artists or other spatial practitioners, and let them talk about their own experience. And this might be, for example, a performance artist, Kerstin Hoheit, who is like the first, that's the very first story. And she has a performance series where she asks people to, or women particularly, to stand in public space, just standing there without, without pretending to wait for someone, just claiming the space. And so these are these kind of performances and like things that you are guided to do, and that help you experience the space in maybe unusual ways. So we have used listening as a tool. Like we think listening to other people's stories is a great tool. And we have used that in other formats before, in like workshop series and lecture series, in this podcast. And for this audio walk on top, we were asking ourselves like, okay, so we architects, so what's our contribution then? Like we can also just do, like be whatever, ethnologists also, and talk to people. And what we were interested in, so we use these 3-dimensional microphones that you put into your ears. And if you listen to the audio walk with headphones on, this is exactly how we re-recorded the sound. So it gives a pretty spatial impression of the actual situation, and that can help like mess with your perception a bit. So you might stand in front of like this huge multi-lane street, and you hear a kid riding on a bike behind you. So because, and even myself, I cut the final piece when I do it, and when I perform it in the city, I'm sometimes like, wait, is this real? Mm-hmm. Is there a car now or not? And I think unfortunately I can't show you the pictures now, but well, just look at the video, please.
Thank you very much.
So if I just share my screen, hopefully that will work. Does that come through? Okay, so
Hello, thank you again. Also, I'd like to reiterate, it's really great to be here to meet you all. I am Alberta. I'm here as part of EDIT, and we are a feminist design collective based in London. Honey, I'm Home, the project that we're presenting here, is an ongoing design and research project that we like to use as a starting point for kind of interrogating and thinking about the intersection between gender and architecture. The project explores the domestic realm as a political entity rather than a kind of innate, natural space that is kind of organically formed out of this so-called natural behavior. And therefore we can understand the nuclear family and the private home as the kind of base unit of societal reproduction within our current patriarchal and capitalist system. This gives us kind of an opportunity, I suppose, to look at the domestic realm and disrupt current heteronormative and hierarchical rituals and relationships to reorganize them and hopefully nurture a more caring and collective way of living. These images are some of the manifestations that the project has taken so far, which kind of focus on unlearning some of these existing design assumptions, but in a playful but hopefully thought-provoking and accessible way. That was kind of short and sweet.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Well, the subject of this discussion is the feminism. Do you feel that your projects have, on this basis, similar ground? Because I feel that most of your projects are based on your personal experience. So maybe you can try to, especially Frani, but probably others too. Can you tell us more about your experience, which leads you to that project or research process? Frani?
Sure, yeah. I guess I would answer, yeah, how I see feminism, I guess, in the kind of study of the mother-daughter relationship, and sort of understanding, yeah, like I wrote in my proposal that I sort of see the project as coming out of this like ethic of daughterhood, which is something that I've kind of been building out, been drawing from Chantal Ackerman, and I think in some ways the kind of like lineage of daughters working with their mothers, daughters watching their mothers has definitely been something I've been drawing on in the project, which I think, yeah, is a sort of like feminist archive that has been extremely helpful as I think about how to sort of go about writing this manual. And so, yeah, I would say that I see it in the kind of like intergenerationality of the project and of the work. And my mom often in some of her anecdotes talks about her mom. And so I think that's where that really starts to sort of build and come through, that there is something really specific to this experience of being a woman and how that's sort of like passed down and inherited and what sorts of responsibilities that comes with. Like I think I want this ethic of daughterhood to be one where like, you know, witness meets action and just thinking about the types of obligations that come with that lineage.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting also connecting it to the project of EDIT, this question of domesticity, for example, and how it changes around the different bodies. I mean, in your project, you have to deal a lot with where to place the furniture. In your video, you explain it, how your mother experienced also that you have to sit lower or higher, and this like all questions which changes also the whole spatial experience of the home.
Mm-hmm.
So can you also like maybe explain a little bit more about that? Because for me it was quite interesting, like all these small tools, also with the bucket, for example, that how you move when you need to do your homework at home, but what can you invent to help the person to do it quickly, easy, safely, and so on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, I mean, in the slide with all the quotes, there was from Amika Dahl yesterday. She said, making as a mode of being is something which is both comfortable and instinctive. However good your form is, however beautiful your piece of housing design might be, if it actively excludes by deliberation or by accident the possibility of people making their worlds and continuing to adjust the world around them, then in some very important way it has failed. And so I think about that, maybe to answer your question, like, how making is a mode of being for my mom, and how she did sort of like draw tools from the built environment to assist her in that. And what a sort of creative exercise that is, and how maybe the sort of question for the field of architecture is also to sort of understand that in many cases, like my mom, knows the kind of help that she needs, so it's maybe more a matter of asking like, how can I help, as opposed to like, here's how I want to help you, and sort of turning it into more of a dialogue, and sort of taking a real interest in what sort of in what the sort of like embodied experience of the home will be, and turning that into more of a conversation.
No, it's like this, as you said, this conversation between you and your mom to realize that idea. It's also probably this collectiveness is also important for all of you three, because like we have two collectives, and you, let's say, it's also like project you made together with your mom, so it's also like a little bit collectively. So I would just like to ask, what does it mean for you to work as a collective? Because sometimes, of course, we at the galleries are also collective, but sometimes it's you both are only women collective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can you maybe like talk about a little bit about it? Because I was like interesting, because your collectives are quite big. So how do you shape your ideas, for example? How do you work how do you work together to develop the ideas, for example, for these projects you presented?
I mean, I think when it comes to edit, the collective is very much part of the project as well. It's something that we're constantly trying to improve, trying to figure out. And I mean, in no way do we have kind of a perfectly structured collective kind of automatically set up or anything. It's very a fluid kind of thing. And also, I suppose it's very important to us to remain collective, as it's very much part of the design work that we kind of intend to participate in. So just like trying to stay as non-hierarchical as possible, and trying to listen and kind of care for each other as much as possible. We were all friends before, so that of course helps kind of create a slightly different relationship than you would in a regular practice. So I guess that's kind of like our main thing. But yeah, seeing that as a political act in itself, to choose to not work in maybe the kind of most productive way, because sometimes when you all need to sit around and discuss something, that will take longer, but the hope is that you get a more rounded kind of discussion and result out of it at the end for listening to various perspectives, which then also, when we collaborate with other groups, we try to kind of also practice that then, and ensuring that everyone is able to kind of have an equal say on an opinion or a design project.
Alberta, you are all of you are architects?
Yeah, we're all from architecture. Some of us now have kind of like veered off in slightly different directions. So we've got a kind of project manager, set designers, some working for local authorities, that kind of thing. But we've all studied architecture, yeah, and some are architects, kind of a straightforward kind.
Okay, then I can do that. So yeah, we're also all architects. That being said, like we have totally different interests and backgrounds as well. So what brings us together is that we all met in architecture school at some point. And from that, like some work in education, I work in urban planning. I'm a cultural anthropologist too. So that's like my previous interest. And some people work in theater or more film, and we have a lot of political, active people. And other than edit, we were not friends before. What brought us together is that we had like this, just something that upset us, and that we wanted to work on. And so we needed more people to get that job done. And so we started with a lecture series in our school, when we found that the lecture series that we had in the department, we didn't like the diversity, like the lack of diversity in the people who were invited. So we started a new format, and we also just made the whole atmosphere a little bit different. It was not like somebody showing just in this dark room showing their work, but we had this like more circle of people. We talked a lot about like the individual backgrounds, about the context that people work in, the networks and everything. So it was like much more like, you know, like sometimes in these formats, like we have questions like, how do you do it with your kids? But it's really sometimes really offending when you're a woman and you're in a format where you're supposed to present your work, and that's the first question you get. And so, but we wanted to create a space where we could ask all kinds of different questions and support each other, and that worked really well. And then eventually, we all became friends through our work in the collective. And what we do, how we do our projects now is it was like a step-by-step thing. So out of the lecture series, we developed new questions and tried new formats like the podcast, where we thought that we could go like get the situatedness of research the situatedness of how the people that we interview, how they work, and so we wanted to visit them. So like we always try to adjust a bit what tools we use. And right now we split up a lot. We try to meet up every 2 weeks at least. We are very much non-hierarchical too. We chat a lot in our Telegram chat and just are there to support each other. And I think it's just like fluidly our projects evolve. And it seems like not a lot of work, honestly, like to come up with new projects. It's more, we kind of want more people to work with us to get everything done.
Let me do some follow-up to the work by Frani, because and sorry, my perspective is rather different. I am the part of that privileged part of the humanity, let's say, so sorry about that. But I think that part of disability in your project is interesting. If we start digging, let's say, it's not a very big digging, but in Caroline Criado Perez's book, we can come to the idea that if the default human is a male, so all women or are somehow disabled. So do you think that we should map this way, as you did with your mother, the whole world, in fact?
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah, and actually the manual. So our final sort of section is on the street, and really thinking about the kind of environment outside of the home and how that would benefit from sort of rethinking its relationship to disability and how people with disability navigate it. And I've done like, maybe a good example is like in one of the diagrams we have a playground, and that really comes out of memories of like my mom and I in a playground, but also I've been interviewing for the project various sort of like occupational therapists and people within the disability community. And one woman made the comment that if a community decides to make a playground accessible, that becomes really a sort of a touchdown for the community, and a touchdown for the community asserting a value of welcoming, people, welcoming everybody, and a value of inclusion. And so thinking about how various kinds of choices like that within public space send a message, in addition to sort of like enabling access in a lot of really important ways.
And I'm asking Lara, your interviews also are some kind of a mapping of the public space in that context.
Yeah, certainly. And I find Frani's work like really beautiful, like how to find a visual language for the personal experience, and like on a very, very small scale. And we are also doing now workshops at UDK with students, where we invited Disordinary Architecture, a group of architects and disabled artists from London, who do like really beautiful work, like where it is like we start from difference. We take our own personal experience first, and we try to find ways to start looking at the details first and understand it. And this is something that brings us together. And we did this workshop where it was a little quite similar to what you did, Frani, that people, so this lockdown, we all have like a shared weird experience of like unusualness of our way we interact with space. and taking this as a starting point to create an understanding that maybe some people always have this, right? Some people can never really leave the house. And so what does that actually mean? Then what are the protocols that you have to follow? What are the tools that you use? Like, what could you make better? And I think exactly this, like, starting to find languages to tell these stories of these individual experiences is definitely a way. I wouldn't go as far, like, I don't feel like a disabled body, but yeah, it's right in a way that the default human is the male, and that's really inscribed in our built environment. And now it is the job to start from difference. I think I really like that quote from Jules Boyce, like starting from difference. Yeah. I was wondering, Frani, were you also working with other people, or have you tried doing what you did with the brochure or the manual? Have you tried doing that with other people, and how did they react?
Well, so I have been connecting with like other people, other occupational therapists to try to find, well, actually there's sort of two ways to answer. One is that, yeah, like there's actually like a really lively kind of social media community of mothers with disabilities. And so through that, like have, and thinking about that also as a sort of mechanism for storytelling, and that so many of these stories are out there and are being kind of informally described in all sorts of really great ways. And I think actually those are sort of, I love the sort of community aspect of that too, that social media allows these women to sort of, have a real network. And I think that's a great element of it. So I've been sort of doing interviews with them and trying to sort of include their perspective in the work, and will ultimately, I think, like share the manual with them. But then the actual product itself is something that we're trying to, have rehabilitation centers include in their kind of dispatch folders. And so in that sense, I've been talking to like a lot of people within the rehabilitation community and occupational therapists. And so also trying to kind of, like learn from their work, and maybe also sort of communicate across like, various kind of patients that they've had and my mom. So that's still kind of in progress, but definitely something, we've been thinking about.
So like to engage like a bigger audience and create a useful tool. So Alberti, can you also tell us more how do you work with public, or how do you engage the public? Because we saw Frani's example, Laura, like with this like public podcast or these walks, how they can approach new audience, and so what is your strategy as a collective, or how do you? Because I like in the video you have this historic perspective of the development of the kitchen, for example, and the space, and then at the end you have this vacuum cleaner, or what was how do you work with for example, if you, because it was images from some exhibition was it from the Oslo?
From Oslo.
So how do you work within the, for example, framework of the exhibition, or how do you try to communicate also your project?
Well, I guess we try to communicate in like a potentially like, we try to simplify what's often quite a complicated relationship into the hoover or the spoon that I showed earlier. Are kind of like very relatable objects, or we'll take images from popular culture like film stills or adverts and things like that, and try and just do like a small tweak that kind of enables the viewer to kind of situate themselves into using the object as it is normally, and then imagine the kind of the consequences of this change. So we kind of trying to find the most kind of relatable or understandable object first, and then you can start to ask, well, if the hoover has to be used by 3 people, what does that mean? Does that mean you can do it as a family? Does that mean that you need a friend to come over? Does that mean you're fighting over who's going in which direction? And kind of like how many other questions? And actually, interestingly, with that hoover, the most like response that we got outside of the architecture community from kind of like family and friends was, there is no way I am using that, because you, like me and my husband, are just going to fight the entire time. I'm like, yes, but like maybe that is interesting because it's kind of showing you that there is a dispute here already, but you just weren't able to kind of understand what that was before, because it's kind of automatically resolved by the way that you split the domestic labor. So yeah, I guess currently we're kind of experimenting with just kind of like small scale, like fun little thought experiments potentially turned into something 3D, but mainly as a process of kind of firstly unlearning for ourselves, but also kind of explaining not everyone's on board with the fact that the domestic space is heavily gendered. They kind of it's easy to imagine that it is just a convenient space that kind of makes sense, but if you are able to demonstrate that how kind of small things either have changed through history or have changed kind of across cultures, or kind of question how ridiculous they potentially are, then you can kind of start to bring people along in this conversation, which I think is something that we're kind of aiming to do. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it was very nice also in the video to see like how you work with this historic perspective, because of course it's you had many issues there, like with the kitchen, and I don't know, with the change of the domesticity in the 50s and so on. So tracing it to the present times, how also the power between the wife and the husband also change and so on. So it was nice to see how that you described nicely the process in the video. I was interested, as we were talking now about the presentations, because of course it's not always easy to take this historical narrative, which is, for example, already explored in many books, and how to communicate it as your research. I want to remind everyone, if there are like some questions or from the audience, you, of course, feel free to ask, or if you have another questions, or if you want to comment on other projects, of course, feel free to do that.
Alberta, I just want to ask you if you use also this whole ideas you already researched in your contemporary or your own praxis, if you have some architecture praxis.
Oh, sorry. I was just reading the question. Was that
no, it's for Alberta.
Sorry, repeating that. I think I missed the beginning of it.
Okay. If you use the whole things you already research in this way in your contemporary praxis, in your architecture praxis, if you do some projects or designs.
So a lot of us also work in architecture practice separately, and I'm in kind of a fairly small scale practice, and I guess so my work mainly focuses on public realm. So then kind of feminist history is like very important, kind of thinking about how space is prioritized and who it's for. So kind of creating space that's accessible for whether it's families or women or someone with a buggy. So yeah, this very much influences that. And we're also currently doing a project with Joss from Disordinary Architecture actually, and Matrix, who, I mean, if you haven't read their book, it's from the 80s now, but that really kind of illustrates perfectly the kind of the public realm and gender, and the kind of how clear it is that the public realm was designed by and for men, and kind of still very much is.
Yeah, so there was a question from the audience, or exactly 2 questions. So at this moment, they are both for Frani, but I can read them. So I don't know if all of you see the comment section, probably. Or...
We do, but I'm not sure if the audience can see them.
So I will read the first question. Hi, Frani. It's from, I don't know, Tanya. From Mao. So I find your project very inspiring, especially how to consider motherhood as a two-way relationship between mother and child. I wonder, have you thought about also making a manual for what it means to be a child tackling disability in, wait a minute, now it's moving because there are like more questions coming, in one way or the other, either a child with disabilities, a sibling, or a child of disabled parents? So, okay, so it's a question from Anna Ulrike Andersen, who submitted a project on architecture of chronic illness. So,
yeah, no, that's a great question. Thanks, Annik. And I think, well, as far as like our particular manual, Mom and I are including kind of 2 essays at the start. So in my essay, I will talk, I think, a little bit more about being a sort of child of disability, but as for being a child with disabilities or a sibling of a child with disabilities, I think, yeah, would love to sort of, I don't know, create kind of more of a sort of culture around even just like very broadly, like thinking about genealogy in different ways and thinking about how we tell our family stories in different ways. And that, yeah, it's quite possible to sort of, I don't know, kind of fuse narratives in a sense, and would love to see, yeah, like a child with disabilities being able, like, yeah, maybe sort of drawing like expression, like tools of expression from this kind of like narrative project to think about how to partner with other members of the family to share a family story. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but.
So should I read another one?
Maybe
it's also.
We can give a short break to Frani and ask a very interesting question for Alberta in regards to, I'm not sure if we have to read them because as far as I understood, Tanya, so no, please read the questions. Okay, so okay, a question to Alberta in regards to the share of the domestic tasks and space. How do you see that the lockdown from the pandemic might potentiate the collaboration and participation as opposed to the 50s division of labor as a result of men coming back from war and rethink work from outside of the home from women? It's the question from Philippa Thomas.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's definitely, there's been something interesting to watch for all of us as this is kind of broken, this like idea of there being kind of the 2 spheres, which of course is also kind of has broken down over time. And at first I was kind of incredibly optimistic about it, I guess. And you started to see all these kind of like videos of either like news presenters and their children kind of popping in, and you start to realize there is a kind of a family and a home behind this, and that was quite welcome. But then I think a series of surveys have been done, and actually, I mean, in the UK at least, it seems that the domestic load for women has actually increased, and it has been women that have mainly been taking on this kind of additional labor. But I mean, I think also one of the things that hopefully we can learn from when it comes to this pandemic, and I don't know if you've been as locked down as we have been over here, but we've been spending most of our time at home, is that I guess we've realized that we can share the space and we can work and potentially do childcare when it comes to some of my older colleagues. So maybe we'll be able to kind of see that in the future and be able to kind of work from home when we need to, and understand that you don't always have to be within this kind of like public work realm to be useful and kind of engaged in the work itself.
So there's another question from Philippa for both collectives, so for Edit and for Volks mainly. Is there a reason why there aren't any men in your collective? There are feminist men after all. Is it intentional?
So we did have somebody ask us, but that actually didn't happen that many times that a man asked us. And it was to support us. And I feel like we're still in touch, and I think we're very happy to be supported by men. I think there are very feminist men. I feel like we have different opinions on this in our group, I believe. Because on the one hand, it is kind of a safe space that we created for ourselves. And I've encountered these situations so many times. Like we had when I was still at UDK, we did a course on gender and building, and it was almost exclusively women. And what happened was that even though it's a very official university setup, and we did like reading and you know, like presentations and stuff, everything else that you do in every course or seminar, it became super personal very quickly. And I think that's a strength. And I feel like in some ways I encountered some of my co-students, even though we had known each other for years, we encountered in a different way, and we shared different stories and connected in a different way, because I don't know, we were like, it was a lot about stories about vulnerability, about like, you know, like questions. And so this is something that I feel like just naturally doesn't occur as naturally if you have mixed groups, from my experience. But that being said, I don't think that I'm opposing having men in our group, and we are very happy to collaborate and do everything. I feel like it's a little bit self-assigned that we call ourselves FemArc, so that might also already be not super inviting, but yeah, I put this out there. Please contact us to collaborate.
I mean, I think for us it was a bit of a coincidence at first, actually, and we didn't intend to set up as all kind of women representing, but I mean, it's something we very much like value now, as it being a very comfortable space, as you're saying. But also we had the conversation recently where we needed to collaborate with some more kind of like makers and carpenters, and we were seeking out also finding women carpenters for that project, and we started debating whether that is actually useful or not. But then we realized that there are many male carpenters out there, and we could easily pick a very good one, but kind of looking a little bit harder to find one that might not be the kind of like the top of your Google search was actually kind of very rewarding. We found this amazing carpenter, Eloise, who also does similar work to us, kind of engaging women with carpentry and making. So kind of having that shared value system was really useful. And then when we were kind of on site together, it was just a completely different experience to what I have experienced outside in kind of regular architecture. Yeah, so it's a bit of an experiment, but and so far it feels quite good. Just about setting up a slightly different way of relating to each other, I suppose, than otherwise.
As another one, in this Read It Loud session, I would like to read very, very interesting, particularly for me, question which can open the discussion to the level which is far bigger than this short, sorry, something is calling, much bigger than this several minutes long session. This is a question to everyone in the room. How do you feel your project's contributions have been, how do you feel your project's contributions have been framed in a panel entitled Feminism Session? Architecture needs feminism, feminists beyond this confined room. Should we frame this issue so narrowly in this one single session focused on some one aspect of our ground? It's a question to all of us.
Yeah, and I'd like to come in there if that's okay. I think for me and the rest of the collective, feminism is kind of a way in. It's not kind of only the goal. Feminism is a way of talking about kind of having a more equal society for everyone, whether that is across gender, class, race, etc., etc. But this was kind of a useful starting point where we felt like we could kind of have a stake in what was being said, but then also use that to approach kind of other hierarchical kind of constructs. So for example, the problem that we often use as an example is the way that domestic labor in the house is often gendered, but this kind of also then translates into the kind of more public sphere where kind of cleaning and other maintenance kind of labor is potentially not as gendered, but definitely racialized and definitely has kind of class implications. So we see the gender and the house therefore as kind of the thing that gets multiplied the moment you step outside it. So it's definitely not just about feminism and necessarily architecture, but it's just a really useful lens to kind of think about it in a clear way that can help you kind of move forwards in design terms and spatialize it.
Lara?
Yeah, I guess it didn't disturb me also because I feel for me probably the term feminism has broadened up so much, a little bit to connecting to what you just said, Alberta. It's not so much just related to women. It's I think it's a way to care and even though we talk in our projects we like to we talk to women and to non-binary people mostly, and we kind of that is our we want to give more visibility to these kind of racial practitioners, but then it is very important for us to integrate notions of class, race, ability, and all this as something that we deeply care for and that we want also to be acknowledged, and that so it's not just about women. So I don't understand feminism as just caring for women, and that's why I think it's okay. But I feel like all our projects could also fit in other panels, but exactly the same with all of the other projects. I feel like there are a lot more projects that could fit into this panel, and so maybe the question is so what is the feminist quality about these projects, but also other projects that we saw? Because if I see climate care, I would say that is a very feminist project in the way how they organize and how they operate and their formats. It's So we should invite more people into this panel, I would say.
And what about you, Frani?
Yeah, I think I echo both of you. Alberta, you were talking about how it's a way in, and I totally agree, and also like a way across. I think that was what was so interesting to me about being sort of put in this room is just seeing the sort of various sort of like connections to be made between like through this sort of like, but in this light some of those more kind of like latent resonances are way more visible, and like Joss Boyce, like I love doing disability differently, which is you mentioned like her as a scholar earlier, and Alberta, like Edit Collective, like definitely my mom and I have been thinking a lot about the porosity between like the home and how more people sort of can be invited in terms of kind of broadening that domestic space. So like, which is just to say like I see so much sort of overlap between what the three of us are interested in, and I don't know that if we hadn't been put in this room, I would have sort of been sort of challenged to really think about where those connections lie, and for that reason I'm really happy to be here.
So then there is another question, if we continue with the questions from Ola to Alberta and to all of you. In what way is the public space and architecture favorizing men? In what way are they privileged? And one more question, how do you as female architects experience discrimination in our profession? I'm an architect too. Thank you.
On the public space favorizing men, I mean, I guess it's not necessary. I guess there are many ways. Some are kind of more discreet, some are more obvious. If anyone's ever tried to navigate our tube network with anything but like a bag, so whether you've got a child or something like that, and of course that isn't explicitly a female trait to have a child, but it is definitely the kind of trend over here that most kind of childcare is still done by women. So the idea that you could use that space in the same way that someone without a child could is kind of quite hard to imagine. And also I think there is, if not in reality, but there is a kind of feeling that we are less safe in public space, and that's not always kind of dealt with in a very useful way, whether it's kind of lighting or visibility or kind of or just a way of just making sure that you feel comfortable walking through the public realm without kind of being afraid of violence or something similar. And that, of course, that works for many different groups across other oppressions as well, of course.
But sorry for interrupting, but is the problem lies on the public space itself or in the aggressor, so means male or yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a system. You can't really, I don't think you can pick one of them as the problem. And I obviously we shouldn't victim blame. And a lot of it is due to the aggressors. But if there's a space that doesn't kind of participate in resolving it, then it's kind of still very present. And space does have a very big impact on our lives. It's hard to kind of to reduce that, I think.
So what about you, Lara? Do you approach this in your project as well? Because you mentioned this project by the artist standing and claiming the space, which is basically exactly what the question is about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, also in your when you do the walks, do you is it a topic like this these walks? How is it different experience for men or women, for example, taking place in the walks, or how are they designed to approach this space and this favorizing men in the public space, as was posted in the question? How do you address?
I would say, yeah, it's favorizing men, but men of a certain kind, you know, a certain height, certain ability, certain race, and I feel like all these things come together. So unfortunately, I will never experience what the walk will feel like as a man. So yeah, it is part of the project insofar as that we try to reflect a lot about the social rules and like, you know, these unspoken things that you know about a space, you know how to behave in it when you're from there, or you don't, and then you feel insecure, and that is so deeply, like, you learn this from such an early age that when I first did the walk in this performance, to just stand there for 3 minutes, I had never really done that before, and I definitely saw myself doing exactly these little gestures. It's like, okay, I always look on my phone, like, oh, you know, it's like pretend, and I do this, and that's something. It's a lot of work to uncover all these things. I don't know. I don't really feel like personally I put so much work in like my everyday life. I don't put a lot of work in trying to explain them to people a lot. I feel like I've personally dealt with this, that I'm very pragmatic. I'm like trying to go the way that works for me, and, you know, like to reach what I want to reach, and through our formats in the group, we reflect on it, and so when I experience what discrimination in a job, I don't know, sometimes it's these little moments when you're the only woman in a group of men, and you're sitting there for like 6 hours, and it just, I don't know, it's just this little extra work sometimes to explain yourself, or, you know, and but as I said, I'm, I guess, in the privileged position right now that I can work with my collective, and that I can take myself as much out of these situations as possible at this point of time. So I don't know, ask me again later.
And do you feel some discrimination in the profession, as Ola asked?
In what?
If you feel some discrimination in the profession of architects, like the women architects, if it's somehow discriminated than the architects men?
I think so, of course. I mean, it is a certain, I do have to explain a little bit more when I'm on a construction site, maybe, or, you know, or even when I'm in a group of men and they have a certain way of talking. So it's like very, as I said, very deeply ingrained things that just, from my experience, you run more often into frustrating situations. You run more often into question marks. Run more often into these situations where you don't feel like you can really speak your mind or something, right? And I feel like, yeah, definitely I've encountered this, but I'm really lucky that I work in teams now where I feel there is an open, mutual understanding of these forms of privilege. And so I work a lot in urban planning, I work in the university, and I work with people that I feel like are very much aware of where it's not a lot of effort to talk about these. But yeah, I mean, obviously the numbers of women in higher positions in the field of architecture are not high. So I think that's a very clear indicator of some of that form of discrimination. So why do they drop out? Why is it easier to not go that extra step up? And yeah, I feel like there is not that much of a discussion. I mean, of course, here and there, but I feel like other fields are just farther ahead in this, yeah, having found a language to address these topics. Yeah.
Okay. And there is also question for Frani. I can read it. This is more of a suggestion. Have you thought of reaching for financial support to carry on your project? IKEA would probably be very interested in supporting it.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. I hadn't thought about finding a sponsor for it, kind of one step at a time, but that's definitely helpful to sort of hear these ideas.
And I didn't ask you, Frani, you are architect also as well?
So I come from a creative writing background. I am working in architecture, but on the kind of communications side. No, I'm not like a trained architect, but yeah, certainly a fan.
So all the design and all the sketches you made by your own without any special studies for this?
No, I worked with a friend on some of the sketches, but yeah, definitely sort of the part that comes most from my background is the kind of storytelling, like anecdote narrative part.
And there was one question for Frani before, which we skipped. So just go back to that question from John Orlek. You spoke briefly about using your manual in streets as well as domestic spaces. Could you talk a little bit about how your approaches, methods translate or are modified in or / for these different contexts?
Sure, yeah. There's, I guess, a couple of ways to answer that question. I would say in the street, both coming up on like ideas for like how to make also maybe to answer, like to sort of tie into that question of the world, like the built environment being designed for men. I think what I found in sort of interrogating the street with my mom is that like really the kind of tragedy of it too is that it just misses all these like opportunities for it's just such a narrowing of the possibilities of the built environment, because like, for example, like curb cuts, you often hear that like curb cuts are not only good for people with disabilities, but they're good for mothers pushing strollers. And something we think about in the manual is like, well, what if it's a mother with a disability, like unpacking even further that idea. But that feels like a sort of like often cited example of how like Laura said, like starting with disability, it turns it more into a kind of like prism of opportunities for like how to think about the built world. And that's something that we've been thinking about. But then the street has been an opportunity for us to really talk about I don't know, like things I think that relate to like Honey, I'm Home, and that thinking about just all the other sorts of people that sort of traversed in and out of like traversed in and out of like my mom's experience as a mother with disabilities. And she'll often say like, it takes a village. And so thinking about how, all the sorts of other things that the people and the places that kind of populated her experience and how really sort of what underlies that is just this sort of like matrix of interdependency, and how important it is that we really talk about that and think about that and try to have our sort of structures reflect that or enable it differently.
We were asked also to try to draw some practical conclusions for the future. So let me try to find one nice quotation, and let me try to put on the Ursula von der Leyen shoes for a while in the context of the new European Bauhaus and ideas for the future similar to this, and ask Alberta, it's a quotation from your proposal: we need to stop designing for growth and start designing for care. And now me as a Ursula von der Leyen, can't we design for both?
I suppose we could, but I would argue we shouldn't. But I mean, that depends on where you fall on the kind of the environmental question. But having been a part of also Architecture Triennale and the degrowth festival, I'm very much kind of sold on that camp, and the idea that I don't think we can design, or we shouldn't design for growth anymore. And that we should kind of design for a new model. And then when we are redesigning this model, I think care should be one of the kind of fundamental priorities, I guess is what I'm saying.
So we can underline it for Ursula von der Leyen.
Yeah.
Any agrees or disagrees? No. So we all agree.
There is probably a new. For Alberta, there is a follow-up question in regards to growth versus care. Have you looked into regenerative ideas?
In terms of kind of dealing with the climate crisis, is that what the question is? In focus in growth but and care. I mean, yeah. In regards of this question, probably between this if you have to choose between the growth and care, as something in the middle, probably, if I understand the question. So the growth and care, or caring in more general sense. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of, we're definitely trying to find somewhere in between, and a lot of people are trying to figure out how to do everything in between at the moment. But I guess, again, we're trying a lot to think about this as like a process of unlearning and therefore kind of starting again. So kind of we're anywhere on the spectrum of either or, but sorry, I don't think I'm making myself very clear. No, we haven't, but I will look into it further, I guess, is the real answer to that question.
I'm just worried that unlearning is even more difficult than learning. So
it's harder than you think, really. Yeah. But I guess unlearning in the sense that we need to understand which things are useful, and obviously some things are useful. Even when it comes to the nuclear family, there are definitely some good things to take away from that. The kind of the love that you feel through some of these relationships, and in some cases are clearly positive. So how can we kind of take that and use it, as well as kind of like put it onto like other models? So something that we're quite interested in is the idea of nurture kinship, and whether you can kind of create these same familial relationships but outside of kind of technically family.
Do you have, Albert, some other project you are working on just now with your collective?
In terms of,
Honey, I'm Home.
Yeah, I mean, we're currently trying to think more at kind of like an institutional scale when it comes to kind of archives and museums, and kind of how we can feminize that process. How can you feminize the archive? How can we kind of create a space where people feel welcome and are able to, I guess trying to create slightly different spaces to kind of the traditional space for sharing information and sharing knowledge. So I guess we've taken kind of the caring from the home a little bit further afield now, but that's still very much something we're experimenting with, and looking across ideas, because there are many ideas across the world and history on those topics.
Lara, can you tell us also a little bit about your future plan? We discussed it a little bit today in the morning, but maybe it's also interesting for the audience, the festival you will be part of, and so on, and how also to expand these walks and so on.
Yeah, so I don't know if I mentioned that, yeah, but so I guess most of our formats are like open formats, and we started them and we always want them to grow, and so are the walks. And our idea is, because we bring in perspectives from different people, different places, and different languages, that we everywhere where we, like in a more formal setting where we perform the walks, we are looking for more stories, and so we are always looking for recommendations. If you know anyone who has to share like an interesting perspective or a unique perspective in a way to tell that, then we would like to create, like, I don't know, maybe more like a platform, like an archive, so that we can choose from, or maybe just like, what's the word, zufällig, I'm spacing. Like randomly can put together these audio walks and really make it like these different stories into one audio walk, and really make it a tool. If you have some time and you want to broaden your perspective, you can go for a walk. I feel like the longer the lockdown is going, the more I'm in need for this. So, but yeah, that's one thing. We will also be part of the Women in Architecture Festival in June in Berlin. In the Bauhaus Reuse, that's an initiative or a little event space by UDK and TU, organized by Zukunftsgeräusche, and they, so we will have some events there, talks that we're in the process of organizing now, and I guess our question is, together, bring more people together and get more perspectives on like what is a feminist, intersectional, more future feasible spatial practice. Because even in like very recent journals or even discursive architecture magazines, we are very upset sometimes by what is still being published and just overly reproduce. And we are looking for more bottom-up ways to give other people voices and make their ideas accessible. This is what we were looking for when we were students. So I feel like we really want to create more tools to empower people to know what paths to take.
So let me read another public question. Would you yourself point a reason why women are less privileged in architecture profession? Is it the history of the profession, or could it possibly be the object orientation of the profession that men are more fond of? So I made an object building that I can be proud of and that makes me more manly. Can we say that we live in the object-oriented society and world, and that this is what makes professions like architecture more man-defined, more easy for men? Do we, women, tend to be too insecure while we move in this profession?
I think that the real question, architecture isn't a microcosm to the rest of the world, right? So anything that affects other industries will probably also affect us. So clearly women are less privileged in many sectors, and architecture is just one of those frontiers. I don't think it is necessarily exclusive to architecture. I think we always try to kind of pick at architecture as being a kind of special problem. And I guess that we're a very slow-moving profession, but I think it is just a kind of a larger scale problem than architecture itself, personally.
I think it's slow-moving in terms of gender bias. It's as slow-moving as IT profession for me. Even it's a bit faster because as we try to figure out the data gathering, so probably even high technology industry is more reproducing the bias in gender than architecture, because architecture, the debate in architecture already started many years ago, and other disciplines which in fact interest us even more than architecture are more tricky than architecture. So, well, I think that the perspective is rather bright in front of your profession. I hope so.
Let's hope so.
The IT example is interesting because that used to be a female profession. Programming used to be a female profession, and so the men were the engineers, and the people who programmed those machines were women, and then after that it got taken over, and so that's really interesting how this still created this like very strong culture that is very inaccessible. And I feel I wouldn't necessarily just describe a problem or the solution to a problem to a certain person. Like it's maybe I'm insecure about certain things, but what is the system behind that makes me feel insecure and makes me feel like not being really part of it. And I feel architecture is definitely something like Bauhaus opened very late to women, and if you look at schools and the way architecture is being taught, I'm not like that. When I say all of this, I feel like I also have to say there are great examples. There are great people who do great work and collective work, and I don't want to say this, but like, and that this doesn't exist, but I can still see in art universities, but probably also in other universities, that you have this like genius of the professor standing there, and it's all up to what the professor likes or doesn't like, and not so much a discourse of culture where you collectively work. And again, there are great other examples, but I feel like that's something that is very persistent in architecture, and which doesn't help to change this. So that's the structural problem that I still see, which is why with our podcast, for example, we really wanted to look at the networks and not so much at the individual who is the creative genius who produces something, because this is something that is very much ascribed to the male genius oftentimes. And if we look at who actually creates the architecture, that prizes that go to a man, and it's a lot of women who also work on this, right? So so there are a lot of women. It's just maybe the way how we look at that and give more visibility and more appreciation to all the other steps in the process of creating spaces.
So do you want to add something, Frani? Or
well, just I really agree with everything that both of you said. And to your point, Lara, it makes me think of design justice. Sasha, I'm forgetting the last name, but he has a quote where he talks about like how who contributed needs to be a sort of critical question for the evaluation of any design project. And that, like our systems of attributing credit are, kind of reproduce some of these inequities just because they singularize, which is interesting.
okay.
Should we draw some conclusions? Who there?
Well, I think we can, I mean, I don't know, continue if there are no other questions, maybe we can end this session because there will be the final discussion in about 20 minutes. So you're all welcome to join the closing discussion of this creative exchange, which will include, I think, 5 guests, each of them representing 1 year of call for ideas. Yeah, so Tanya is already writing that in the chat room as well, so that we are all invited into the main room for the session looking over the future architecture, which link you will find in the program you all have probably in your email or on the website of Future Architecture. So I don't know if you, like Bara or Michal, if you want to add something.
No, I would like to say a big thank you to all of you, and I hope that we all stay in touch because your entries are really interesting, and I hope we can figure out something interesting together. So thank you very much again, and thank you, our dear audience, for your questions and participation, and spread the feminism around the world, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.